The bucket slipped from Natalie Turner's fingers and clattered against the stone edge of the well as her knees buckled beneath her. The relentless Colorado sun beating down on her bonnet as everything went black. She had been drawing water for the third time that morning, her body protesting each movement after 3 days of barely eating while she stretched the last of her provisions to care for her ailing father. The journey from Missouri to Salida had drained their savings, and the tuberculosis that racked his lungs had only worsened in the high altitude. At 22 years old, Natalie had become both nurse and provider, taking in mending work and laundry when she could find it. But the summer of 1878 had been brutal, and work was scarce. The last thing she remembered was the way the world tilted sideways, the dusty ground rushing up to meet her face, and then nothing but darkness. When Xander Grayson rode up to the well on his bay mare, he had been planning to water his horse before heading back to his small ranch 3 miles outside town. What he found instead was a young woman crumpled beside the well, her brown calico dress dusty from the fall, her face pale beneath the harsh sunlight. He was off his horse in seconds, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud as he rushed to her side. "Madam." His voice was rough from a morning of limited conversation, deep and concerned as he knelt beside her. When she did not respond, he pressed 2 fingers gently against her neck, relieved to feel the steady pulse beneath her skin. She was burning up with fever, her forehead slick with perspiration that had nothing to do with the heat. Xander looked around the small cluster of buildings that made up the eastern edge of Salida, but there was no one nearby at this hour. Most folks were inside, escaping the worst of the midday heat. He made a quick decision, scooping the unconscious woman into his arms with practiced ease. She weighed next to nothing, all sharp angles and delicate bones, and his jaw tightened with concern as he settled her carefully across his saddle before mounting up behind her. His ranch house was closer than town, and from the looks of her, she needed rest and food more than she needed a doctor poking at her. He had seen this kind of collapse before, usually in folks who had been pushing themselves too hard with too little sustenance. His mother had been a healer of sorts before she passed, and she had taught him enough to recognize when someone was simply worn down to nothing. The ride to his property took 20 minutes, and he kept one arm wrapped securely around the woman's waist the entire time, steadying her against him as his mare picked her way along the familiar trail. She stirred once or twice, making small sounds of confusion, but did not fully wake. The Grayson ranch was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy wooden house with a covered porch, a barn, and a few outbuildings scattered across 20 acres of grazing land. He had inherited it from his father 2 years ago, and at 26, he had been working hard to build up the herd and make something lasting of the place. Xander carried the woman inside, shouldering open the door and bringing her to his own bedroom since it was the most comfortable space in the house. He laid her carefully on the bed, then went to fetch water and clean cloths. When he returned, her eyes were fluttering open, confusion and fear mingling in their green depths as she tried to sit up. "Easy now," he said, setting down the basin and holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You collapsed at the well in town. I brought you here because you need rest." Natalie stared at the stranger, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing she remembered was the terrible spinning sensation, and now she was in an unfamiliar room, lying in an unfamiliar bed, with a tall cowboy watching her with concerned brown eyes. "My father," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "I need to get back to my father. He is sick, he needs me." "You are not going anywhere right now," Xander said firmly but gently. You passed out from exhaustion and fever. If you go back like this, you will not be any help to him at all. Rest here tonight, let me get some food in you, and tomorrow morning I will take you back to town myself." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, but the room was starting to spin again, and she had to close her eyes against the dizzying sensation. When she felt a cool cloth against her forehead, she nearly wept with relief. "What is your name?" the cowboy asked softly. "Natalie Turner," she whispered. "We have been in Salida for 2 months. My father and I came from Missouri. I am Xander Grayson. This is my ranch." "You are safe here, Miss Turner. I promise you that." Something in his voice made her believe him, and she was too weak to resist as he helped her take a few sips of water. The cool liquid felt like salvation against her parched throat. "I will make you some broth," Xander said, standing up. "Try to rest while I am gone." She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, he was back with a bowl of steaming chicken broth and some bread. He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, and handed her the bowl. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon, and after watching her struggle for a moment, he gently took it from her. "Let me help," he said. Under normal circumstances, Natalie would have been mortified to have a stranger feed her like a child, but she was too weak and too hungry to care about propriety. The broth was rich and savory, clearly made from scratch, and each spoonful seemed to bring a little more strength back to her body. "This is good," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Thank you." "My mother's recipe," Xander replied, a hint of sadness crossing his features. "She always said good broth could cure just about anything." They sat in companionable silence as he fed her the rest of the soup and made her eat half the slice of bread. When she was finished, she felt more human than she had in days, though exhaustion still pulled at every limb. "Tell me about your father," Xander said, taking the empty bowl and setting it aside. "What is wrong with him?" "Tuberculosis," Natalie said, her voice thick with worry. "He contracted it back in Missouri, but we thought the mountain air might help. Instead, it seems to have made him worse. The altitude makes it hard for him to breathe, and I fear." She trailed off, unable to voice her worst fears. Xander nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "There is a doctor in town, Dr. Whitman. Has he seen your father once when we first arrived? He gave us some medicine, but it is expensive and we have run out." She looked down at her hands, shame coloring her cheeks. "I have been trying to find work, but there is not much available for a woman in my position. What kind of work can you do?" Xander asked, not out of judgment but genuine curiosity. "I am good with a needle. I can sew, mend, make clothes from scratch. I can cook and clean, tend a garden, care for animals. My mother made sure I knew how to run a household properly before she passed." Natalie's voice grew stronger as she listed her skills, pride overcoming embarrassment. An idea was forming in Xander's mind, but he pushed it aside for the moment. "Rest now," he said, standing up. "I am going to ride into town and check on your father. Where are you staying?" "The boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Patterson's place. We have the room at the end of the hall." Natalie's eyes widened with gratitude and fresh tears. "You would do that, of course. I will let him know you are safe and bring him some supper. Try to sleep while I am gone." After he left, Natalie lay back against the pillows, her mind reeling from the unexpected kindness of this stranger. She had encountered few people willing to help since arriving in Salida, most folks being too concerned with their own struggles to take notice of others. Yet this cowboy had not only rescued her, but was now going out of his way to care for her father as well. She looked around the room, noticing the simple but solid furniture, the clean curtains on the window, the rag rug on the wooden floor. Everything spoke of a man who took care of what was his, who valued order and cleanliness. There was a photograph on the dresser of a stern-looking couple, likely his parents, and next to it, a small carved horse that looked like it had been made by a child's hand. Despite her worry for her father, exhaustion soon claimed her, and she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she had experienced in weeks. Xander found the boarding house easily enough and climbed the stairs to the room Natalie had described. He knocked gently, and a weak voice called for him to enter. The man lying in the narrow bed was gaunt and gray, his breathing labored and rattling in his chest. He looked to be in his early 50s, though illness had likely aged him beyond his years. His eyes, the same green as his daughter's, focused on Xander with confusion and worry. "Who are you? Where is Natalie?" "My name is Xander Grayson, sir. Your daughter collapsed at the well this morning from exhaustion and fever. She is resting at my ranch, and I promised her I would check on you and bring you supper." He held up the basket he had stopped to fill at the general store. Nathan Turner tried to sit up, but the effort set off a coughing fit that left him gasping and wiping blood from his lips with a stained handkerchief. When he could speak again, his voice was rough with pain and guilt. "Is she all right? Lord, I have been such a burden on that girl. She gives me everything and keeps nothing for herself. She is going to be fine once she gets some rest and proper food," Xander said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "Let me help you eat something, and then we can talk." He had brought soup, bread, and some canned peaches, and he patiently helped Nathan eat small portions of each. The older man's appetite was poor, but he managed more than he had been eating on his own, according to what he told Xander between bites. "You have shown great kindness to strangers, Mr. Grayson," Nathan said when he could eat no more. "I cannot repay you, though I wish I could." "I am not asking for repayment," Xander said, "but I do have a proposition that might help your situation if you are willing to hear it." Nathan gestured for him to continue, curiosity lighting his tired eyes. "My mother passed 2 years ago, and I have been managing this ranch on my own since then. I am capable enough with the cattle and the land, but the house has suffered from my neglect. I can cook basic meals and keep things from falling apart, but I could use help with the domestic side of things. Someone to cook proper meals, keep the house in order, maybe tend a garden and help with preserving food for winter." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I would like to offer your daughter a position as my housekeeper. The wages would be fair, and there is a small cabin on the property that I have been meaning to fix up. You both could live there, rent-free, and she would be close enough to work each day. The cabin is not much, but it is sound and dry, and I think the lower altitude might be easier on your lungs than being right in town." Nathan stared at him for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Pride fought with desperation, hope with suspicion. "Why would you do this for people you do not know?" Xander met his gaze steadily. "Because I can, and because I need the help. It is a fair trade, Mr. Turner. Your daughter works for honest wages and a place to stay, and I get a proper housekeeper. There is nothing charitable about it." He was being generous with the truth. They both knew it, but Nathan was too tired and too sick to keep fighting a battle he could not win. His daughter needed security, and if this young man was offering it with honor and respect, he would be a fool to refuse. "I would need your word as a gentleman that my daughter would be safe under your roof," Nathan said, steel entering his voice despite his weakness. "You have it, sir. I will treat her with nothing but respect, and if at any point either of you is unhappy with the arrangement, you are free to leave with no hard feelings." Xander extended his hand, and Nathan took it, his grip weak but sincere. "Then we accept your offer, Mr. Grayson. Call me Xander, please. I will let Natalie rest tonight and tomorrow, and then I will bring you both out to the ranch in a few days. That will give me time to make the cabin habitable. After making sure Nathan was as comfortable as possible and had water within reach, Xander headed back to his ranch. The sun was setting, painting the Colorado sky in shades of orange and pink, and he found himself thinking about the young woman sleeping in his bed. She had been pretty, even exhausted and feverish, with delicate features and hair the color of honey. But it was not her appearance that occupied his thoughts. It was the determination he had seen in her eyes when she talked about caring for her father, the pride in her voice when she listed her skills. She was a fighter, and he respected that. When he arrived home, he found her awake and sitting on the porch in one of his mother's old dresses that he had left out for her. Her own clothes had been so filthy that he had taken the liberty of washing them and hanging them to dry. "How is he?" she asked immediately, standing up as he approached. "Weak, but he ate some supper. I think he will be all right for a few days." Xander climbed the steps and leaned against the porch railing, facing her. "I made him a proposition and he accepted, but I want to make sure you are in agreement as well." He explained the arrangement he had offered her father, watching her face carefully as she processed the information. He saw surprise, suspicion, hope, and finally cautious acceptance cross her features. "You would do all this? Provide housing and wages just for housekeeping?" She sounded skeptical, and he could not blame her. "I would. I need the help, Miss Turner, and you need the work. It benefits us both. But I want you to understand that this is a business arrangement. You would be my employee, nothing more or less. I expect honest work, and you can expect honest treatment in return." Natalie studied him in the fading light, trying to read his intentions. She had been raised to be cautious of men's motives, but everything about Xander Grayson seemed genuine. His eyes were direct and honest, his manner respectful but not obsequious. He had done nothing but help her since finding her at the well, and he was offering her a lifeline when she desperately needed one. "I accept," she said finally. "And thank you, Mr. Grayson. You have been kinder to us than you had any obligation to be." "Xander," he corrected with a slight smile. "If we are going to be working together, we should use first names, and you are welcome, Natalie." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was business, as he had said, nothing more. "Are you feeling better?" he asked, gesturing for her to sit back down. "Much better, thank you." The rest and the food helped tremendously. She settled back into the chair, and he took the one beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The air was cooling rapidly, as it always did in the mountains, and Natalie pulled the shawl he had given her more tightly around her shoulders. "Tell me about Missouri," Xander said eventually. "What made you decide to come west?" Natalie sighed, memories both happy and sad flickering across her face. "We had a small farm outside of Independence. My father worked as a blacksmith in town, and my mother and I managed the farm. It was a good life, simple but content. Then my mother died of influenza 4 years ago, and my father threw himself into his work to cope with the grief. He worked too hard, in all kinds of weather, and eventually his lungs gave out. The doctor said the damp climate was making it worse and suggested we try somewhere dry, with clean mountain air. So you sold everything and came to Colorado," Xander finished. "Yes, we had heard good things about Salida, how it was a growing town with opportunities. We thought we could start fresh, that father might recover and we could build a new life. But it has been harder than we expected. The altitude makes his breathing worse, not better, and our savings ran out faster than we planned." She looked down at her hands, shame evident in her posture. "I am not usually so helpless. I hate that you found me in such a state." "You are not helpless," Xander said firmly. You are exhausted from carrying a burden that is too heavy for one person. There is a difference. What you have been doing, caring for your father while trying to support both of you, that takes incredible strength." His words brought tears to her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Thank you for saying that." They talked late into the evening, sharing stories of their lives and families. Natalie learned that Xander had been raised on this ranch, that he had one sister who had married and moved to Denver, and that he had briefly considered becoming a lawman before deciding to honor his father's legacy by keeping the ranch going. Xander learned that Natalie could play the piano, that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, and that she made the best apple pie in 3 counties, according to her late mother. When they finally went inside for the night, Xander insisted she keep the bedroom while he made himself comfortable on the sofa in the front room. She protested, but he would not hear of it. "You are still recovering," he said. "I will be fine out here. Sleep well, Natalie." "Good night, Xander," she replied softly, closing the bedroom door. As she lay in the comfortable bed, surrounded by the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to everything in the house, Natalie found herself thinking about the man sleeping in the next room. He was unlike any man she had met before, equal parts strong and gentle, confident yet humble. The way he had cared for her, the kindness he had shown her father, the respect with which he treated her, it all spoke of a character that was increasingly rare in her experience. She fell asleep with a sense of security she had not felt since her mother died, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that things might actually work out. The next morning, Natalie woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, which had been cleaned and mended while she slept, and went to find Xander in the kitchen. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the stove with a smile. "I hope you are hungry." "Starving," she admitted, taking a seat at the table. "But you should let me cook. If I am going to be your housekeeper, I should start earning my keep." "Not until you are fully recovered," he said firmly, setting a plate in front of her laden with eggs, bacon, and toast. "Consider this your last few days of rest before the work begins." They ate together, chatting easily about his plans for the day and what needed to be done to make the cabin ready. After breakfast, he showed her around the property, pointing out the barn, the chicken coop, the root cellar, and finally the cabin. It was a small structure, built of sturdy logs, with one main room that served as living area and kitchen, and a small bedroom partitioned off in the back. It had a stone fireplace, 2 windows with intact glass, and a solid roof. It was dirty and dusty from disuse, with cobwebs in the corners and mouse droppings on the floor, but Natalie could see the potential. "My grandparents lived here when they first homesteaded this land," Xander explained. "After they built the main house, they used it for storage and as a place for ranch hands to stay during roundup. It has been empty for about 3 years now, but the structure is sound. It needs a good cleaning, some fresh whitewash, and probably a new mattress, but it should be comfortable enough." "It is perfect," Natalie said, walking around the space and mentally cataloging what would need to be done. "With some work, it will be a fine home for Father and me." Over the next 3 days, they worked together to transform the cabin. Xander repaired a loose board in the floor and replaced the broken latch on the door, while Natalie scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. He brought over furniture from storage in the barn, a table and chairs, a rocking chair, a dresser, and a bed frame with a new mattress he purchased in town. She made curtains from fabric he had bought at the general store, sewing late into the evenings by lamplight, while he worked on oiling the door hinges and replacing a cracked window pane. They fell into an easy rhythm of working side by side, talking about everything and nothing. Natalie found herself laughing more than she had in years, often at Xander's dry observations about life on the ranch, or his self-deprecating stories about his failed attempts at domestic tasks. "I once tried to make a cake for my sister's birthday," he told her while they were painting the cabin walls with fresh whitewash. "I followed the recipe exactly, or so I thought, but somehow I confused salt with sugar." She took one bite and nearly spit it across the room. "I have not attempted baking since." Natalie laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "That is terrible, you poor thing. My sister still brings it up every time I see her. I will never live it down." He grinned at her over his paint brush. "That is why I need you, Natalie. To save me from my own cooking." The casual way he said, "I need you" made her heart skip a beat, though she tried to ignore the sensation. This was business, she reminded herself. He needed a housekeeper, nothing more, but as the days passed, it became harder to maintain that mental barrier. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands when he helped her hang the curtains, the consideration he showed in everything he did. He always asked her opinion, listened when she spoke, and treated her as an equal partner in their work rather than a subordinate. For his part, Xander was finding it increasingly difficult to think of Natalie as merely an employee. She brought life and warmth to his home in a way he had not experienced since his mother died. The sound of her humming while she worked, the way she bit her lip when concentrating on a difficult task, the genuine interest she showed in his ranching stories, all of it was weaving itself into the fabric of his daily existence in ways both wonderful and terrifying. On the fourth day, they brought Nathan out to the ranch. Xander had borrowed a wagon from a neighbor and made the bed as comfortable as possible with blankets and pillows. Nathan was even weaker than he had been a few days prior, the journey clearly taking a toll, but his eyes brightened when he saw the cabin. "You did all this for us?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Natalie did most of the work," Xander said, helping him down from the wagon with careful hands. "I just provided some muscle and materials." They got Nathan settled in the bedroom, and Natalie fussed over him until he was comfortable and had water and medicine within reach. Xander had made another trip to Dr. Whitman and purchased more of the elixir that seemed to ease Nathan's cough, refusing to let Natalie pay him back despite her protests. "Consider it part of your employment package," he had said when she argued. "I need you healthy and able to work, which means your father needs to be as comfortable as possible so you are not constantly worrying about him." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Natalie would wake before dawn and walk the short distance to the main house, where she would prepare breakfast for Xander before he headed out to work with the cattle. While he was gone, she would clean, do laundry, tend the vegetable garden he had helped her plant, and prepare the midday meal. In the afternoons, she would often do mending or other tasks that could be done while sitting with her father, and then she would return to the main house to prepare supper. Xander adjusted his schedule so that he always came back to the house for meals, claiming it was more efficient than eating cold food out on the range. In truth, he looked forward to those breaks in his day, the chance to sit across from Natalie at his table and hear about her morning, to make her laugh with stories about stubborn cows and ornery horses, to simply be in her presence. The attraction between them grew slowly, building like a summer storm on the horizon. It was in the lingering glances, the accidental touches when passing dishes at the table, the way they found excuses to be near each other. Xander found reasons to need things from the house during the day, and Natalie discovered tasks that kept her working later into the evening. Nathan, from his bed in the cabin, watched his daughter's transformation with a mixture of joy and sadness. She was blooming under Xander's kindness, her cheeks filling out as she ate regular meals, her smile returning more frequently. He knew she was falling in love, even if she had not admitted it to herself yet. And while he was grateful beyond measure for the young rancher's goodness, he worried about what would happen when he died, because Nathan knew he was dying. The blood he coughed up grew more frequent, his breathing more labored each day. Dr. Whitman had been honest with him during his last visit, telling him he likely had months at best. The knowledge sat heavy on his heart, but he found peace in knowing that Natalie would be cared for. He saw the way Xander looked at his daughter, with respect and growing affection, and he recognized it as the same way he had once looked at his own beloved wife. It was a warm evening in late August when things shifted between Xander and Natalie. They were sitting on his porch after supper, watching the sun set behind the mountains, when a commotion arose from the direction of the cattle pens. Xander jumped up and ran toward the sound, Natalie following close behind. One of his cows had gotten tangled in some loose wire fencing and had torn a deep gash in her leg in her panic to escape. Xander was already at her side, trying to calm the frightened animal while assessing the damage. "I need to stitch this," he said, his voice tense with concern. "Natalie, can you help me? I need someone to hold her steady and hand me supplies." "Tell me what to do," she said without hesitation. For the next hour they worked together in the fading light. Xander cleaned and stitched the wound with steady hands while Natalie spoke soothingly to the cow and kept her calm, passing Xander clean cloths and the needle and thread when needed. It was messy, difficult work, but they moved together with an unspoken coordination that surprised them both. When it was done and the cow was settled in a stall to recover, they walked back to the house, both covered in blood and dirt. Xander pumped water so they could wash their hands and faces, and as Natalie scrubbed at a particularly stubborn stain on her sleeve, he spoke quietly. "Thank you for your help tonight. You did not have to do that. Of course I did. You needed help and I was here." She looked up at him, water dripping from her face. "That is what partners do, is it not? Help each other." The word partners hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond its surface definition. Xander reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted, and gently wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. "Partners," he repeated softly, his brown eyes searching hers. "Is that what we are?" Natalie's breath caught at the tenderness in his touch, the question in his gaze. She knew they were standing at a crossroads, that her answer would change everything between them. She could step back, maintain the professional boundaries that had been growing increasingly blurred, or she could be honest about the feelings that had been building in her heart. "I would like us to be more than that," she whispered, her courage surprising even herself. Xander's hand moved from her cheek to cup her jaw, his touch reverent and careful. "So would I. I have wanted to say something for weeks, but I did not want to make you uncomfortable or abuse the position of power I hold as your employer." "You could never do that," Natalie said, reaching up to cover his hand with her own. "You are the most honorable man I have ever known, Xander Grayson." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that made his whole face light up, and slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was soft and sweet, a tentative exploration that spoke of respect and growing affection. Natalie's eyes fluttered closed as she kissed him back, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering as hard as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, their eyes locked on each other. "I have wanted to do that for so long," Xander admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I am glad you finally did," Natalie replied, a shy smile playing at her lips. They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to break the spell until finally Xander stepped back reluctantly. I should let you get back to your father. But Natalie, I want you to know that my feelings for you are serious. I am not playing games and I am not looking for something temporary. Neither am I, she assured him. I care for you, Xander. More than I probably should, given how recently we met, but I cannot help how I feel. Then we will take this slow, do things properly, he said. I want to court you the right way with your father's permission and everything above board. Does that sound acceptable to you? The old-fashioned formality of his words made her heart swell with affection. That sounds perfect. That night, as Natalie walked back to the cabin under a sky full of stars, she felt lighter than air. When she entered their small home, she found her father awake and waiting for her. He kissed you, Nathan said, not a question but a statement. He could read it in her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. He did, Natalie confirmed, unable to keep the smile from her face. Father, I think I am falling in love with him. I know you are, sweet girl. And he feels the same about you, I would wager. Nathan patted the bed beside him and she sat down, taking his frail hand in hers. Xander Grayson is a good man, Natalie. He will take care of you when I am gone. Father, please do not talk like that, she said, tears springing to her eyes. We need to talk like that, he said gently but firmly. I am dying, Natalie. We both know it, even if we have not said it out loud. And I need to know that you will be all right, that you will have someone to love and care for you. Xander is that man, I am certain of it. So when he asks for my blessing to marry you, because he will ask, I want you to know that you have it freely given. Natalie laid her head on her father's shoulder and cried quietly while he stroked her hair, just as he had when she was a little girl. They sat like that for a long time, both acknowledging the inevitable and finding comfort in each other's presence. True to his word, Xander courted Natalie properly over the following weeks. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadow, took her on picnic rides to scenic overlooks, and sat with her and Nathan in the evenings, reading aloud from books or playing cards. He treated her with a combination of respect and affection that made her fall deeper in love with him every day. They stole kisses when they could, sweet stolen moments in the barn or on the porch after Nathan had gone to sleep. But Xander never pushed for more. He was content to hold her hand, to feel her lean against him as they watched the sunset, to hear her laugh at his jokes. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Natalie's organization and domestic skills freed up Xander's time to focus on expanding the herd and improving the property. She preserved vegetables from the garden, made cheese from the cow's milk, and managed to make their resources stretch further than Xander would have thought possible. But more than her practical contributions, she brought joy and warmth to his life that had been absent for too long. As autumn painted the aspen trees gold and sent cool breezes down from the mountain peaks, Nathan's condition worsened rapidly. He could no longer leave his bed, and his breathing became so labored that sleep was nearly impossible. Natalie spent more time at the cabin, and Xander understood, often bringing supper to them there and sitting with Nathan so Natalie could rest. One evening in late September, as the three of them sat together in the cabin's main room, Nathan called Xander to his bedside. "I need to speak with you, son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Xander moved closer, taking the chair beside the bed. "What can I do for you, Nathan? You can promise me that you will take care of my daughter, that you will love her and protect her when I am no longer here to do so." Nathan's eyes, though dimmed by illness, burned with intensity. "I promise you, sir. I love Natalie with everything I am, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is happy and cared for." Xander's voice was steady and sure. "Then you have my blessing to marry her if she will have you. I know I will not live to see the wedding, but I can die in peace knowing she will be in good hands." A coughing fit interrupted him, and Natalie rushed over with a cloth and water. When he could breathe again, Nathan reached out and took both their hands, placing Natalie's in Xander's. "You two are meant for each other. I have seen it from the beginning. Promise me you will not wait too long out of deference to mourning customs. Life is too short and too precious to waste." "We promise, Father," Natalie said through her tears. Nathan died peacefully 2 days later, with Natalie holding one hand and Xander holding the other. His last words were of his love for his daughter and his gratitude to the young rancher who had given them both so much. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sturdy pine tree with a view of the mountains he had hoped would heal him. The service was small, attended by the few friends they had made in Salida, and conducted by the circuit preacher who passed through town once a month. Natalie grieved deeply, but she did not grieve alone. Xander was there every moment she needed him, holding her when she cried, listening when she needed to talk, giving her space when she needed solitude. He moved her things into the main house without asking, setting her up in the guest room and making it clear she was not returning to the cabin alone. "You are family now," he said simply when she tried to protest. "Family stays together." In the weeks following Nathan's death, their relationship shifted again. The urgency of life's brevity, highlighted by Nathan's passing, made them both more aware of how much they wanted to build a future together. They began talking seriously about marriage, about what their life would look like, about dreams and hopes for the years ahead. On a cold November evening, with the first snow of the season dusting the ground, Xander asked Natalie to take a walk with him. He led her to the hill where her father was buried and, in the shadow of the pine tree, dropped to one knee. "Natalie Turner, you walked into my life when I did not even know I was lonely. You brought warmth and joy and purpose to days that had become just a routine. You made me laugh again, made me want to be better, made me understand what it means to truly love someone. I know we have not known each other long, and I know the timing might seem rushed to some, but I am certain of this. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" He pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and Natalie felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this wonderful man kneeling before her. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears. "Yes, Xander, I will marry you. I love you so much." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at once, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Your father would be happy," Xander said softly, looking at the simple wooden cross that marked Nathan's grave. "He is," Natalie replied with certainty. "I can feel it." They were married 3 weeks later in the same small church where they had held Nathan's funeral service. It was a bittersweet moment for Natalie, walking down the aisle without her father to give her away, but when she saw Xander waiting for her at the altar, his eyes full of love and promise, her heart soared. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored wool that she had sewn herself, with her mother's cameo pinned at her throat. Xander wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, meaning every word, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her with a reverence that made several of the assembled guests tear up. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with neighbors contributing food and drink for a modest but joyful reception. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts to the happy couple. Xander held Natalie close as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, and she felt a contentment settle over her that she had not known was possible. That night, as Xander carried her over the threshold of their home, Natalie marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from desperate and alone to loved and cherished, from uncertain about the future to confident in the path ahead. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a gentle exploration of newly granted intimacies. Xander was patient and considerate, making sure Natalie felt safe and loved every moment. They talked in whispers in the darkness afterward, sharing secrets and dreams, making promises about the life they would build together. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. But those days became some of Natalie's favorite memories. Cozy hours spent by the fire with Xander, reading together, playing games, simply enjoying each other's company. He taught her to play chess, and she taught him to knit, though he proved spectacularly bad at it, much to her amusement. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, they threw themselves into the work of the ranch with renewed energy. Natalie planted an expanded garden, started raising chickens for eggs and meat, and even convinced Xander to let her try her hand at beekeeping after reading an article about it in a farming magazine. The bees proved surprisingly successful, and by summer's end, they had several jars of golden honey to sell in town along with Natalie's surplus vegetables and eggs. The extra income was welcome, but more than that, Natalie loved having her own small enterprise, something she had built with her own hands and knowledge. As the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Xander. When Dr. Whitman confirmed her condition and told her the baby would likely arrive in late winter, she could barely contain her excitement. She told Xander that evening after supper, unable to wait any longer. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for and more. He let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the horses, picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, and then very gently set her down and placed his hand on her still flat stomach with a look of wonder. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "We are," Natalie confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, pulling her close. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a partnership, love, and now this. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the winter cold made Natalie more tired than usual. Xander fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and do less, until she finally had to put her foot down and remind him that pregnant women had been working on farms and ranches since the beginning of time. "I am not fragile," she told him firmly but lovingly. "I am strong and I am healthy, and I need to keep moving. The baby and I are fine." He grudgingly backed off, though she would often catch him watching her with concerned eyes when he thought she was not looking. It was endearing, really, how much he cared. On a bitterly cold February night, with snow falling heavily outside, Natalie went into labor. Xander rode through the storm to fetch Dr. Whitman and Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, who served as the town's midwife when needed. The doctor arrived first, and Mrs. Patterson followed an hour later, both of them snow-covered and half-frozen but determined to help. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Xander paced the front room like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom, driving the doctor to distraction with his constant questions. "Your wife is strong, Mr. Grayson," Dr. Whitman said patiently for the 10th time. "This is normal for a first baby. She is doing fine." Finally, as the winter sun was setting on the second day, Xander heard the sound he had been praying for, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Moments later, Mrs. Patterson emerged from the bedroom with a tired but triumphant smile. "You have a son, Mr. Grayson." A big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs on him, and your wife is tired but well. You can go in now." Xander did not wait for her to repeat the invitation. He rushed into the bedroom and found Natalie propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xander approached with almost reverent caution, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets, his heart swelled with a love so fierce it took his breath away. The baby had a shock of dark hair, a tiny button nose, and was making small snuffling sounds as he slept. "He is perfect," Xander whispered, reaching out to gently touch the impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his much larger one, and Xander felt tears sting his eyes. "You are perfect, and you did so well. I am so proud of you, Natalie." "Would you like to hold him?" she asked, and at his nervous nod she carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Xander held his son with careful wonder, marveling at how small and fragile he seemed, yet how solidly real. This was his child, his and Natalie's, a physical manifestation of their love and the future they were building together. "What should we name him?" Natalie asked, watching her husband and son with soft eyes. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at his son's face, Xander knew exactly what felt right. "What about Nathan?" he suggested. "Nathan Grayson, after your father. He brought us together in a way, and I would like our son to carry his name." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. "Nathan Grayson, I love it. Father would have been so proud." The next months were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant demands of caring for an infant. But they were also filled with joy and wonder as they watched little Nathan grow and change. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's strong features, and he was adored beyond measure by both parents. Natalie proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, but also practical about the realities of infant care. Xander helped whenever he could, often taking the baby in the early mornings so Natalie could sleep a bit longer, walking the floor with Nathan when he was fussy, changing nappies without complaint. "You are a better father than you give yourself credit for," Natalie told him one evening as she watched him gently rock their son to sleep. "I had good examples to follow," Xander replied, thinking of his own father and of Nathan Turner, "and I have the best partner anyone could ask for." As Nathan grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Xander was able to hire a part-time hand to help with the heavier work, which gave him more time to spend with his family. They expanded the herd, improved the grazing lands, and built a larger barn. Natalie's garden and chicken operation grew as well, and her honey became popular enough that the general store in town placed regular orders. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm of work and family, of seasons turning and years passing. When Nathan was 3 years old, Natalie became pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Emma, after Xander's mother. Emma had her father's brown eyes and her mother's honey-colored hair, and she quickly wrapped both her parents and her big brother around her tiny fingers. The years continued to pass in a pattern of hard work and deep satisfaction. Nathan grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch, eager to learn everything about cattle and horses and the land. Emma was more interested in her mother's pursuits, helping in the garden and with the chickens, learning to cook and sew at Natalie's side. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander and Natalie stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains just as they had done countless times before. The house had been expanded over the years, with additional rooms for the children and a proper dining room for family meals. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. "You remember the day we met?" Xander asked, his arm around Natalie's waist. "I collapsed at the well and you carried me home and told me to rest here tonight," she recited, leaning into him. "How could I forget? It was the day my life truly began." "I thought I was just helping someone in need," Xander admitted. "I had no idea that the exhausted woman at the well would become the center of my entire world." "We have been blessed," Natalie said softly. "So much more than I ever dared to hope for." "The best is yet to come," Xander promised, kissing the top of her head, and indeed it was. Over the following years, they watched their children grow into capable, kind-hearted adults. Nathan proved to be a natural rancher, with his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind for business. By the time he was 20, he was managing most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Xander to slow down a bit and enjoy his middle years. Emma surprised everyone by developing a passion for teaching. She attended the new teachers' college that had opened in Denver and returned to Salida to teach at the expanding school system. She met and married a young lawyer named Thomas, and together they gave Natalie and Xander 4 grandchildren to dote on. Nathan eventually married as well, to a rancher's daughter from the neighboring property named Sarah. It was a love match from the start, and Natalie saw in her son's eyes the same wonder and devotion that Xander had always shown her. Nathan and Sarah built a house on the far end of the property and raised 6 children who kept the ranch loud and lively. As Xander and Natalie grew older, they gradually turned over more responsibility to Nathan and Sarah, though they remained active and involved in ranch life well into their 60s. They took pride in watching their legacy continue through their children and grandchildren, in seeing the values they had worked so hard to instill taking root in the next generation. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch, just the 2 of them, holding hands and watching the sunset. They would talk about their life together, remembering the early days, marveling at how far they had come, expressing gratitude for every blessing they had received. "I was so afraid that day at the well," Natalie admitted during one of these conversations. They were both in their early 70s now, still healthy and active but moving a bit slower than they once had. "I thought I had reached the end of my rope, that there was no way forward. And I was just a lonely cowboy, going through the motions of living without really knowing what I was missing," Xander replied. "We saved each other that day, Natalie." "We did," she agreed. "You gave me a home and security when I desperately needed it, but more than that, you gave me love and partnership and a family. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Xander insisted. "You brought warmth and joy and purpose to my life. You made a house into a home, turned empty days into a life worth living. Every good thing I have is because of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the familiar mountains turn purple and gold in the fading light. The sounds of the ranch drifted to them on the evening breeze, Nathan calling to one of his sons, the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses in the pasture. It was a symphony of home, of family, of a life well lived. "You have any regrets?" Natalie asked eventually. Xander thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I have made, every path I have taken, led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "Neither do I," Natalie said, squeezing his hand. "Not one regret, only gratitude." As they aged into their late 70s, Xander and Natalie remained devoted partners, caring for each other through the various ailments and challenges that came with advancing years. When Xander's knees grew stiff and painful from a lifetime of hard ranch work, Natalie was there to help him with patient hands and herbal remedies she had learned over the years. When Natalie's eyesight began to fail, making it difficult for her to do the needlework she loved, Xander read to her every evening, his voice still strong and steady. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren were constant visitors, bringing noise and life and laughter into their home. Natalie loved hosting big Sunday dinners where 3 generations gathered around the expanded table, sharing food and stories and love. These were the moments she treasured most, seeing the family she and Xander had created spreading out before her like branches on a strong tree. One spring evening, as they sat on their porch watching yet another sunset, Natalie turned to Xander with a soft smile. "We did well, did we not? With our life, with our family, we did better than well," Xander replied, his now weathered hand still fitting perfectly with hers. "We built something lasting, something that will continue long after we are gone." "I love you, Xander Grayson," Natalie said, just as she had said countless times over their 50-plus years together. "Thank you for seeing me that day at the well, for carrying me home, for giving me a place to rest." "I love you too, Natalie Grayson," Xander replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for staying, for choosing me, for building this beautiful life with me. You have been my greatest blessing." As the sun finally dipped below the mountains, casting the world in twilight, they sat together in perfect contentment. 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary from that chance meeting at a well on a hot summer day so long ago. The ranch would continue on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own story to the legacy. But at the heart of it all, the foundation on which everything else was built, was the love story of a cowboy and a young woman who collapsed at a well, and the beautiful life they created together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. Years continued to pass gently for Xander and Natalie, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. They celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary surrounded by what had become a large and thriving family. Emma had organized the celebration at the ranch, with tables set up in the meadow and enough food to feed the entire town of Salida, which by now had grown into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. At the celebration, Nathan stood and raised his glass, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "My parents taught us many things growing up. They taught us the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the power of kindness. But most importantly, they showed us every single day what real love looks like. The way they care for each other, respect each other, and choose each other again and again, that is the greatest lesson they ever gave us." Emma added her own toast, tears streaming down her face. "When I was a little girl, I used to watch Father bring Mother wildflowers from the meadow, just like he still does. I used to see the way they looked at each other across the dinner table, like they shared a secret no one else knew. I grew up believing that was what marriage should be, and I was lucky enough to find it with Thomas. Thank you, Mother and Father, for showing us the way." The grandchildren and great-grandchildren took turns sharing their own favorite memories and expressions of love, and by the time they were finished, there was not a dry eye in the crowd. Xander and Natalie sat at the center of it all, holding hands as always, their faces shining with joy and pride. When it was his turn to speak, Xander stood slowly, his body bent with age but his spirit still strong. "I have been blessed beyond measure in this life. This ranch, this family, all of it started with one moment of divine providence when I rode up to a well and found a young woman who needed help. I thought I was saving her that day, but the truth is, she saved me. Natalie gave me a reason to be better, to work harder, to love deeper. Every good thing in my life flows from that moment when she came into my world." He turned to his wife, his brown eyes still full of the same love and wonder they had held 60 years ago. "You are the love of my life, Natalie Grayson. You always have been and you always will be." Natalie stood and embraced her husband, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. They danced together that evening, moving slowly to music played by their great-grandchildren on fiddle and guitar, and everyone who watched them felt they were witnessing something sacred and rare. As summer turned to autumn in their 81st year, Xander began to slow down noticeably. He developed a persistent cough that reminded Natalie painfully of her father's illness all those years ago. Dr. Whitman's grandson, who had taken over the practice, examined him and delivered the news gently. Xander's heart was failing, weakened by decades of hard living and physical labor. There was nothing to be done, except make him comfortable. Natalie took the news with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout her life. She rearranged their bedroom so Xander could rest comfortably and see out the window to the mountains he loved. She prepared his favorite foods and read to him from the books he enjoyed. Most importantly, she stayed by his side, her presence a constant comfort. Nathan and Sarah moved into the main house to help care for his father, and Emma came to visit as often as her own family obligations allowed. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren streamed through regularly, each wanting to spend time with the patriarch of their family while they still could. One evening in late October, with the aspen leaves brilliant gold outside the window, Xander called Natalie to sit beside him on the bed. His breathing was labored, but his mind was clear. "I am not afraid," he told her, holding her hand. "I have lived a full and beautiful life, and I am ready for whatever comes next." "I know," Natalie said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, "but I am not ready to let you go." "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," Xander said, reaching up to cup her cheek. "You will be all right, Natalie. You have our children and grandchildren to support you, and you have the strength you have always had. Promise me you will keep living, keep enjoying life for both of us." "I promise," she whispered, leaning into his touch, "but I will miss you every moment of every day." "I will be waiting for you," Xander said with certainty. "However long it takes, I will be there waiting when it is your time. We are not ending, Natalie, just pausing. Our story will continue." He passed away peacefully, 2 days later, with Natalie holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. His last words were, "I love you," directed at his wife, and his last expression was one of peace and contentment. They buried him on the hill next to Nathan Turner, under a pine tree with a view of the mountains and the ranch he had built. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the decades, and the tribute spoke of a man who was honest, kind, hardworking, and devoted to his family above all else. Natalie grieved deeply, but not destructively. She honored the promise she had made to Xander and continued to live fully, even in her sorrow. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, maintained her garden, and could often be found sitting on the porch in the evenings, talking quietly to Xander as if he were still beside her. "The children are doing well," she would tell him. "Nathan has expanded the herd again, and Emma's oldest just graduated from college. The ranch is thriving, just as you would want it to. I miss you terribly, but I am grateful for every moment we had together." She lived for 3 more years after Xander's death, years filled with family and purpose. She taught her great-granddaughters to sew and cook, told her great-grandson stories about their great-grandfather, and made sure that everyone knew the history of the ranch and how it had all begun. On a warm June evening, sitting on the porch with Emma beside her, Natalie closed her eyes and simply did not wake up. She passed as peacefully as her husband had, with a slight smile on her face, as if she were dreaming of something wonderful. They buried her next to Xander, and on the stone that marked their graves, the family carved, "Xander and Natalie Grayson, together in life, together in eternity." Their love built a legacy that will last forever. At the funeral, now elderly Nathan stood before the assembled mourners and shared the story his mother had told him many times over the years. "My mother used to say that her life truly began the day she collapsed at the well, and my father carried her home and told her to rest. She said it was the moment when everything changed, when she went from merely surviving to truly living. Their love story started with an act of simple kindness, and it grew into something that shaped all of our lives." He gestured to the large crowd, spanning 4 generations of the Grayson family. "This is their real legacy, not just the land or the buildings or the cattle. It is us, the family they created and nurtured with patience and love and sacrifice. It is the values they instilled in us and that we are passing on to our own children. It is the example they set of what it means to truly love another person, to choose them every day, to build something lasting together." Emma added, her voice strong despite her tears, "Mother told me once that the best thing you can do in life is find someone who makes you want to be better, and then do the work every single day to deserve them. She and Father did that work every single day of their 63 years together. And the result is all of this, all of us. We are there happily ever after." After the service, family members lingered on the hill, sharing memories and stories. The children told their children about the grandmother who had survived terrible hardship to build a beautiful life, about the grandfather who had been both strong and gentle, about the love that had been the foundation of everything they knew. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, just as it had done countless times before, the family gradually made their way back down the hill. But they would return often to this spot, to stand before the graves of the couple who had started it all, to remember and honor the love story that had changed so many lives. The ranch continued on, just as Xander and Natalie had hoped it would. Nathan and Sarah ran it for another decade before passing it on to their own son, who in turn would pass it to his children. Each generation added their own chapter to the story, but they all looked back to that summer day in 1878 when a cowboy found a young woman collapsed at a well and carried her home, setting in motion a love story for the ages. The small cabin where Natalie and her father had first lived was preserved and eventually turned into a sort of family museum, filled with photographs and mementos from the early days. Visitors would stand in that single room and marvel at how something so grand had grown from such humble beginnings. On the mantel in the main house, Natalie's children placed a framed photograph taken on their parents' 50th wedding anniversary. In it, Xander and Natalie stood on their porch, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera with eyes that still held the wonder and joy of their early days together. Below the photograph, Emma had written a small inscription. She collapsed at the well. He carried her home. They built a life. This is their story. And it was a good story, a true story, a story of unexpected meetings and compassionate hearts, of hard work and deep love, of a family built on the foundation of 2 people who chose each other again and again, every single day, through every challenge and joy that life brought them. In the evenings when the work was done and the family gathered for supper in the big dining room, someone would often raise a glass and say, "To Xander and Natalie." And everyone would respond, "To Xander and Natalie," honoring the memory of the couple whose love had made it all possible. The ranch still stood strong, a testament to their vision and hard work. The land still rolled out in all directions, dotted with cattle and horses, bordered by mountains that had witnessed the entire story. The house still sheltered generations of Graysons, filled with the noise and warmth of family life. And on the hill, under the pine tree with a view of everything they had built together, Xander and Natalie rested side by side, their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy living on in every descendant who carried their blood and their values into the future. It was a proper ending to a beautiful story, one that had started with collapse and rescue, with kindness and compassion, and had grown into something magnificent and lasting. They had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind something of value that would continue long after they were gone. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever comes after this life, Xander and Natalie were together again, still holding hands, still watching sunsets, still choosing each other just as they always had for all eternity.